The highway was empty, the kind of quiet that made the skin crawl. Jack Carter's hands gripped the steering wheel of the ICE transport truck like his life depended on it, because tonight it just might. The desert stretched out endlessly on both sides of the road, the moon casting a ghostly sheen over the asphalt. Inside the back of the truck, 20 undocumented immigrants sat in silence, eyes full of fear and uncertainty. Jack didn't ask questions anymore, not after what happened in El Paso. He adjusted the rearview mirror. That's when he saw the headlights, 4 of them, fast, too fast. A voice crackled through the radio. "Carter, you've got company. Possible cartel activity near mile marker 214. Stay alert." His heart dropped. "Copy that," he said, but his voice was hollow. In the back of the truck, a young woman with sharp eyes and a quiet, controlled presence shifted in her seat. Her name was Emily Reyes, but Jack didn't know that yet. All he knew was that she wasn't like the others. She didn't look scared. She looked ready. Suddenly, the roar of engines filled the air. 2 black SUVs flanked the truck, one slamming into the side panel hard enough to rattle Jack's bones. "Shit!" Screams erupted from the back. Gunshots followed. Automatic fire ripped through the metal siding like paper. Emily moved. She grabbed the edge of the seat and launched herself forward, slamming her shoulder into the side door. With a twist of her wrist, she yanked a metal rod loose from beneath the bench and used it to smash through the emergency latch. The door flung open, and she was out before anyone could blink. Outside, chaos unfolded. Men in tactical gear, cartel enforcers, had surrounded the truck. One aimed his rifle at the cabin. Emily struck him first. She moved like a ghost, like a memory of violence. One hit to the throat, a sweep of the leg, and he was down. Another turned just in time to catch a knee to the face. The third didn't even have time to scream before she disarmed him and used his own weapon to take out the fourth. Inside the truck, Jack stared through the side mirror in stunned disbelief. What the hell is she? Emily finished the last man with clinical precision, her face expressionless, her movements efficient and brutal. She stood in the moonlight, breathing hard, her clothes torn, hands bloodied, but calm. Calm like a soldier. She turned to the truck. Jack opened the door and stepped out, holding his sidearm, trembling slightly. "You want to tell me what the hell just happened?" he asked. Emily didn't look at him. Instead, she checked the fallen men, collecting weapons, ammo, radios. Then, finally she spoke. "You were compromised. They knew your route. You'd be dead if I wasn't on this truck." Jack stared at her. "You're one of the immigrants." "I'm a passenger," she corrected, slinging an assault rifle over her shoulder. "But I'm not one of them." He raised an eyebrow. "Who the hell are you?" She looked at him then. Really looked at him. And for a second Jack saw it. That calm, haunted look in her eyes. The kind soldiers have after too many tours, too many kills, too many ghosts. "I used to be Delta Force," she said, voice steady. "I'm not anymore." A pause. "Why the hell are you on my truck?" "Looking for someone," she said simply. "Someone the cartel took." Jack exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well, lady, whatever your past is, you just saved my ass and theirs," she said, glancing at the truck full of terrified passengers. A siren sounded faintly in the distance. Reinforcements, or more cartel. Hard to say in these parts. Emily looked at him again. "We need to move," Jack nodded, still trying to process what the hell just happened. As they climbed back into the truck, Jack started the engine with a shaky hand. The smell of smoke, gunpowder, and sweat filled the cabin. He looked over at her. "You sure you're not CIA or something?" She gave a ghost of a smile. "I'm sure." He didn't know what this woman had seen, or done. But one thing was clear. Emily Reyes wasn't running from something she was hunting. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The truck rumbled down the deserted road, its tires crunching over sand and shattered glass. Inside the cab, the silence between Jack and Emily was thick, like a storm that hadn't broken yet. Jack kept glancing at her from the corner of his eye. She sat like a statue, hands resting on her lap, a rifle slung across her chest like it belonged there, not nervous, not even breathing hard. He'd been a cop for 12 years. He knew the look of someone who'd killed before and someone who hadn't lost sleep over it. "You ever going to explain how a Delta Force operator ends up in the back of an ice truck?" Jack asked finally, trying to keep his voice light. It came out a little too tense. Emily didn't answer right away. Her eyes were focused out the windshield, on the black ribbon of road unwinding in front of them. "Depends," she said. "You ready to hear the real version, or the one that makes me sound normal?" Jack gave a dry laugh. "Lady, nothing about you says normal. Start wherever you want." She leaned back, eyes distant now, voice low. "I grew up in El Paso, South Side. My mom cleaned houses, my dad, well, he disappeared when I was 10. Might have crossed the wrong people or just ran off. Nobody ever found out." She paused. "My older brother Mateo took care of me after that. He was all I had. Smart, stubborn as hell. He got into some bad things when we were teenagers. Gangs, small-time stuff. Tried to protect me from it, but I saw everything." Jack didn't interrupt. He knew this tone, raw, careful, like she was opening a wound that never really healed. "One day he told me he was going to get out. Said he had a plan. A real one. I didn't believe him. Nobody gets out clean. But then he did something dumb. He stole from a cartel runner. Thought he could flip it for cash and disappear." Her eyes flickered with something sharp. "They found him in pieces 3 days later. Left him on the steps of our church." Jack swallowed hard. "Jesus! That's when I stopped being a kid." She turned her head slightly toward him. "I joined the army on my 18th birthday. Never looked back." Jack raised an eyebrow. "And they just let you in? No trouble?" "I scored off the charts," she said, a trace of pride in her voice. "IQ, language, strategy. They fast-tracked me into special operations training. I wasn't supposed to make Delta Force. Women don't usually." "But you did," she nodded. "I did. 3 tours. Syria, Somalia, and the one nobody talks about." Jack let out a low whistle. "So what happened?" "I found out the war doesn't stop when you come home," she said softly. "You just bring it with you." He understood that better than most. His own demons had followed him from the job to his front porch, and hadn't left when his family did. Emily reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small photo. It was old, worn at the edges. A girl, maybe 17, long dark hair, eyes like Emily's. She handed it to Jack. "My sister," she said. "Isabel." Jack looked at the photo. "She's beautiful. She was taken last year. Tried to cross the border the legal way, but things went sideways. I found out a cartel network's been targeting women at immigration centers, trafficking them. Isabel's name popped up in a manifest a week ago. That's why I got on your truck." "You think she's still alive?" Emily's jaw tightened. "I know she is." Jack handed the photo back carefully. "And you're going to burn down the whole damn country to get her back." Her voice was steel. "If that's what it takes." They lapsed into silence again. Outside, the sky was just starting to lighten with dawn. They had a few hours before the cartel regrouped, before ICE started asking why one of their trucks had turned into a war zone, before the storm. "You trust anyone in ICE?" she asked suddenly. Jack shook his head. "Not anymore." "Good," she said, "because someone fed them our route." He turned to her slowly. "You think there's a leak?" "I know there is. I just don't know who." Jack tightened his grip on the wheel. "This just keeps getting better." Emily looked at him. "You could walk away, you know. Drop me off." "Say you didn't see anything." Jack stared straight ahead. "And leave you to go full Rambo on your own?" "You wouldn't be the first," Jack smirked. "Yeah, well, I'm not like most people." Emily looked at him for a long second, then nodded slowly. "Good," she said. "I'm going to need someone who can drive." A grin tugged at the corner of his mouth despite himself. "You always this charming?" She leaned back in her seat, finally closing her eyes for the first time in hours. "Only when I'm just getting started." The sun broke over the horizon like a secret being exposed, hot, relentless, and blinding. The desert came to life in golden silence, but inside the truck, the air was heavy with suspicion. Jack drove with one hand on the wheel, the other tapping nervously against the gear shift. Every time he looked at Emily, he felt the same mix of awe and unease. She was quiet, now studying a folded map she'd pulled from the glove compartment. Her movements were smooth, efficient, like everything had been rehearsed 100 times in her head. "You do realize," Jack said finally, "once we hit the checkpoint in Sierra Blanca, we're going to have to explain a lot of things." Emily didn't look up. "Like the 4 dead cartel soldiers we left on the road?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, that. Plus the bullet holes in the side of my truck." She folded the map calmly. "We're not going through the checkpoint." "Excuse me? We're detouring. There's a service road 20 miles east, abandoned. It'll take us around the Border Patrol station." Jack stared at her like she'd grown another head. "You can't just skip a federal checkpoint. ICE is already going to be on edge. You want to explain to them how a woman they didn't clear for transport has a kill count?" He didn't answer. Because she was right. He sighed, looked out the window. The desert stretched like a vast burnt canvas. "This is insane." Emily glanced over at him. "You're already in it, whether you like it or not." They drove in silence for another few minutes, the hum of the engine the only sound. In the rearview, back of the truck, the passengers were eerily quiet too, as if they sensed the tension. Jack knew a few of them by name. They were scared people, not criminals, trying to run toward something, not away. "You ever think about leaving it all behind?" he asked. Emily gave a small, humorless laugh. "Every day since I came home." "What stopped you?" "I still had someone left to save." She looked at him then. "What about you? What keeps you here?" Jack's jaw tightened. "Used to be my wife and son. They left 2 years ago. Said I wasn't the same after the job." He didn't add the part about waking up screaming or drinking too much, or the 1,000-yard stare he couldn't get rid of. Emily probably already knew. "You still love them?" she asked. He nodded, eyes straight ahead, every second of every day. The quiet returned, heavier this time, more real. Up ahead, a dirt road appeared off the main highway, nearly hidden behind a crooked sign and a rusted fence. Emily sat up straighter. "There. Take it." Jack slowed and turned the truck, dust kicking up behind the wheels as they veered off the beaten path. The road was rough, jarring, like the land itself didn't want them there. Brush and mesquite scraped against the metal sides. The sun beat down harder now. They drove for nearly an hour before Jack noticed the van. It was parked just off the road, half hidden behind a rock formation. Windows tinted black. Engine running. He tensed. "That's not random." Emily already had the rifle in her hands. "Slow down." As the truck rolled past, Jack tried not to stare, but a figure stepped out of the van anyway. Male, thin, wearing a dark tactical vest and a baseball cap pulled low. Emily's eyes narrowed. "Keep driving," she said. "Don't stop unless they force us." Jack did as she said, but his gut twisted. He'd seen those vests before, not ICE, not Border Patrol, private security, the kind cartels used when they didn't want to get their hands dirty. As they passed, the man raised a hand and tapped 2 fingers to his earpiece. Behind them, the van shifted into gear. "They're tailing us," Jack said, glancing in the cis mirror. Emily's voice was cold. "Then they'll need to learn what happens when you follow a delta." She climbed into the back before Jack could say anything else. He heard her speak in Spanish, clear, commanding. The passengers moved quickly, quietly, like they trusted her more than anyone else they'd ever known. Then, without warning, the back doors flung open. Jack shouted, "What the hell are you?" But Emily was already airborne. She landed on the hood of the van like a demon dropped from heaven. Rifle slung, pistol drawn. The driver swerved wildly, trying to shake her, but she crawled across the windshield and fired twice into the glass. The van crashed into a ditch with a shriek of metal and sand. Emily rolled off the side, landing hard but steady. Jack slammed the brakes and jumped out, running toward her. Smoke billowed from the wreck. One man inside the van tried to crawl out. Emily walked over and kicked the weapon from his hand. "Who sent you?" she demanded. The man coughed blood and laughed. "She's already gone," he said in broken English. "Your sister, she's property now." Emily's face turned to stone, then she hit him, once, hard enough that he crumpled. Jack stood there, stunned. "Jesus, Emily." She turned to him, eyes distant. "That wasn't a message for me," she said softly. "It was a warning." Jack stared at her. "We're being watched." The sun was climbing higher, baking the desert in a dry, merciless heat. Jack stood by the side of the truck, hands on his hips, staring at the still smoking wreck of the van in the ditch. His pulse hadn't come down since the crash. Emily was already pulling intel from the bodies, like she'd done this 100 times before because she had. They had burner phones, she said, tossing one to Jack. Wiped, but I can crack it. Are you sure about that? He asked, catching the phone and turning it over. She pulled a multi-tool from her boot and popped the back off the second phone. These guys were trained but not smart. No encryption. Probably relied on signal jammers. And brute force. Jack paced, watching her work. They knew exactly where we'd be. You think they're tracking us or just following? Emily didn't answer right away. Her brows furrowed as she scrolled through a diagnostic screen on the burner. Someone's feeding them our location in real time. Could be GPS from the truck, could be something else. They knew the detour road too. That's not public ice routing. Jack swore under his breath. You're telling me we've got a rat inside ice? Emily stood, dusting herself off. I'm telling you this operation goes higher than just some border smugglers. This is coordinated, funded, and it's personal. Jack looked at her. Because of your sister? Emily met his gaze. Because of what I did before I left Delta. There were missions, ones that weren't in the official record. People I pissed off, cartels I crippled. This might be payback. She didn't say it like someone bragging. She said it like someone confessing. Jack stepped closer. You think this is about you? No, she said. It started with me, but now they have Isabel, and they're sending messages. That van back there? That was a message. Jack leaned against the hood of the truck, running a hand through his hair. So what now, we keep running? Emily shook her head. No, we stop reacting. Jack looked up. I'm tired of being hunted, she said. It's time we turn this around. She walked to the back of the truck and climbed in. The passengers were scared, some crying, others silent. She spoke to them in calm, steady Spanish, told them they'd be safe, that she'd get them somewhere, secure, that she needed a little time. When she stepped out, Jack looked at her like she was made of iron. You sure you want to make this personal? It already is. Emily pulled out a tattered notebook from her bag and flipped it open. Inside were hand-drawn maps, names, codes, fragments of addresses. This, she said, pointing to a small star marked near the border, is a drop house. Cartel safe house used to move people and weapons. I raided it once, years ago. They moved. Operations since, but if I know them, they're still using the area. Jack's brows furrowed. You're going after them? Not all of them, she said. Just the one who knows where Isabel is. You think someone there will talk? Emily's eyes darkened. They'll talk. Jack opened the truck door and paused. You realize this could get us both killed? She climbed into the passenger seat, loaded weapon resting in her lap. If we do nothing, they win. If we hit them first, maybe we get a shot. Jack slammed the door shut and started the engine. Well then, let's go pick a fight. They drove east, away from the main road and into rougher terrain, uncharted trails cut by smugglers and ranchers over decades. Emily gave directions like she was reading from memory, each turn a calculated risk. Crows circled overhead. Jack felt it in his gut, the tension before a firefight. He'd felt it as a cop before a raid. This was worse. When they reached a dusty ridge overlooking a small cluster of broken-down buildings, Emily motioned for him to stop. This is it, she said. They scanned the area through binoculars. 2 trucks, 3 armed men at the front, 1 at the back. Light surveillance, not enough for a full-scale operation, which meant the real action was likely inside. Looks abandoned, Jack muttered. Emily shook her head. They're trying to make it look that way. But the perimeter guards, that's not for show. She pulled a suppressed pistol from her side holster and handed Jack a smaller one. You still remember how to use one? Jack took it with a grim smile. Let's just say I've had practice. They circled wide, moving low and silent, through thorny brush and brittle scrub. Emily took out the first guard without a sound, an arm around the neck, a quick twist, and he crumpled. Jack hesitated, but followed her lead. By the time they reached the back entrance, Emily's heart was pounding, not from fear but from focus. She hadn't done this in a while, but it came back like a reflex. Inside, the building smelled of sweat, gun oil, and damp concrete. They moved quickly, clearing one room after another, until they reached a locked steel door. Behind it, voices. Male, Spanish. Loud. Emily mouthed, "On 3." Jack nodded. They burst in like lightning. 3 men, 1 woman tied to a chair, not Isabel. Emily scanned the room and didn't blink. "Hands up!" Jack yelled, but one man reached. Emily shot him first. The other 2 dropped their weapons instantly. She marched up to the nearest one and grabbed his collar. "Where is Isabel Reyes?" The man looked terrified. "I don't know who that is." Emily pressed the gun into his forehead. "You do now," he stammered. She was moved 2 weeks ago, special order. Not here anymore. She's with El Silencio." Emily froze. Jack looked at her. "Who the hell is El Silencio?" She turned, face pale. Not who. What? The name echoed in Emily's mind like a ghost she thought she buried a long time ago. El Silencio. It wasn't just a nickname, it was a warning, a whisper in black market circles, a boogeyman in the deepest parts of the intelligence world. Even in Delta, she'd only heard it spoken once, and the guy who said it didn't live much longer. Jack stared at her, still holding his gun low but ready. "Emily, talk to me. Who the hell is El Silencio?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes were locked on the man still pressed against the wall, his face soaked in sweat. He wasn't fluffing. She could feel it in her gut. "You're sure that's where she went?" she asked, voice low and sharp. "I swear," the man stammered. "They said she was special. VIP. That he wanted her personally." Emily took a step back. Her hands were trembling now, not from fear but from rage. She turned to Jack. "El Silencio doesn't run a cartel. He runs all of them. Nobody knows where he came from. Some say ex-Mossad. Some say CIA ghost who went rogue. Whatever the truth is, he only comes out of the shadows for 2 reasons, money and revenge." Jack's face darkened. "And you've crossed him?" Emily nodded. "In Syria 5 years ago. He was running an illegal weapons pipeline through Black Ops contractors. American gear, our gear. I burned the entire network." "You never mentioned that," Jack said quietly, "because I thought he was dead." Jack looked at the man still, cowering on the floor. "Where is he now?" The guy shook his head. "Nobody knows. He moves constantly. Underground bunkers, safe houses, guards trained like soldiers. But there's one place." He hesitated. "A fortress, south of Juarez. Deep desert. You don't get in unless he wants you in." Emily narrowed her eyes. "You've seen it." "I've delivered people there." Jack took a sharp breath. "People like Isabel?" The man's silence was the answer. Emily stepped forward, gun still at her side. "You're going to draw us a map. Every turn, every outpost, every checkpoint. You screw us, you die." He nodded quickly, trembling. Okay. As Jack pulled him toward the table and started digging for paper, Emily stepped away. Her head was spinning. The walls felt too tight, too close. Jack glanced at her. "You okay?" She nodded once. "I didn't think this would go that deep. I thought I was hunting low-level traffickers. Maybe a mid-tier boss, not him." Jack gave her a look. "You don't have to do this alone." She looked at him for a beat. "I know." They took the woman tied to the chair, an older migrant from Guatemala who'd been scheduled for the next transfer, and secured the house with what little equipment they had. Emily marked the place for ICE to investigate later, if they still had anyone she trusted in the system. By the time they hit the road again, the sun was starting to dip toward the mountains. The desert was darker now, its beauty edged with menace. Jack stared at the hand-drawn map in his lap. "This place is a fortress." Emily didn't take her eyes off the road. "We're not storming it. Not yet. First, we learn it. Pattern their shifts, intercepts. I want to know where El Silencio eats, sleeps and breathes." Jack looked over at her. "What if Isabel's already gone?" Emily clenched her jaw. "Then we follow the trail until it ends." They drove in silence for a while, the wind buffeting against the truck as the miles ticked by. Emily's mind was already racing through old Delta strategies, recon, insertion, extraction. But this was different. No team, no backup. Just her and a man she barely knew who'd stuck around when everyone else would have bailed. Jack finally broke the silence. You know, I keep asking myself why I'm still here. She glanced at him. You figure it out yet? I think so, he said, because I've spent my whole life enforcing the rules, but I never questioned who wrote them. Emily gave him a long look. You're starting to. Yeah, he said. And it scares the hell out of me. She smiled faintly. Good, means you're still human. They camped that night under the stars, on a ridge overlooking the desert trail leading toward Juarez. Emily barely slept. Jack did his best to rest, gun at his side. The map lay between them, covered in red ink. At midnight, Emily sat alone at the edge of the ridge, staring at the dark horizon. She thought of Isabel, of the girl who used to braid her hair, who used to sing at night to drown out the gunshots in their neighborhood, who believed Emily was a superhero. If El Silencio had taken that light away, she would become everything she feared and everything he deserved. The sun was just beginning to rise when Emily spotted the first drone. It buzzed high in the sky, small and silent, the kind used by private military contractors or narco-tech labs that had more cash than ethics. Emily and Jack were camped on a rocky bluff, half a mile from the target zone. They'd been up since 4 a.m., watching shadows shift in the desert. Jack lay flat on his stomach beside her, binoculars pressed to his face. Movement at the southeast fence, he whispered. 2 guards. Military gear, not cartel junk. Emily nodded. They rotate every 12 minutes. That's the 4th shift I've clocked. Same pattern. The place wasn't just a stronghold. It was a fortress. Nestled deep in the desert south of Ciudad Juarez, it looked like an abandoned mining facility from the air. But through long-lens scopes and thermal optics, they saw the truth. High. Fences with electric wiring, guard towers with heat sensors, dogs, satellite blockers. And beneath the surface, tunnels, storage bunkers, holding cells. What the hell is this place? Jack muttered. Emily's voice was low. It's a prison, disguised as a warehouse for people. They'd intercepted radio chatter the night before. Spanish code phrases, rapid-fire commands. Emily had translated them in real time. Shipment ready. Auction schedule confirmed. VIP delivery coming Thursday. Jack's stomach turned when he heard those words. These aren't immigrants, he said. They're inventory. Emily didn't respond. Her face was stone, but her hands were trembling around the rifle stock. Then they saw something worse. A black SUV pulled into the compound. 2 men got out. One was tall, lean, wearing a clean-cut tactical suit, too clean for a cartel soldier. The other was shorter, bald, with snake tattoos running down both arms. He dragged a young girl out of the back seat by her hair. Jack sat up fast. Jesus Christ! Emily's heart skipped. The girl was about 17. Long black hair, thin, barefoot. From this distance it was hard to tell. But for a second Emily thought it was Isabel. She lowered her scope, breathing hard. That's not her, she whispered, trying to convince herself. But she's just like her. They watched as the girl was taken inside. Jack clenched his jaw. How many more like her are in there? Too many, Emily said. And they're not just being held, they're being sold. Jack stared at her. And this El Silencio? He runs it all? Emily gave a slow nod. This isn't a cartel. This is a trafficking empire. Militarized, profitable, invisible. Jack cursed under his breath. This is way bigger than us. Exactly, Emily said. That's why we have to be smart. She reached into her bag and pulled out a flash. Drive. We're not going in guns blazing, not yet. First we expose it. Jack frowned. To who? ICE? Homeland Security? The same people leaking our locations? Emily gave him a look. I know someone. He's off books now, but back in the day, he ran ghost ops for the NSA. If I get this footage to him, he'll blow the whole thing open, with names. Jack hesitated. You trust him? No, she said honestly. But I trust that he hates traffickers more than he hates me. They spent the next 3 hours recording. Guard patterns, facial recognition shots, license plates, cargo movement. Emily even risked creeping closer to plant a signal intercept device in the brush just outside the eastern perimeter. She moved like smoke, invisible, lethal, silent. By the time she returned, Jack had already packed their gear. "We've got what we need," he said. "Now what?" Emily looked out at the compound. "Now we disappear. Get this to the only man who can help us. Then we come back." She looked at him, "and burn it all to the ground." But as they turned to leave, something caught Jack's eye. Movement to the north on the ridge. He grabbed the binoculars and swore. 3 men, tactical gear, sniper scopes, not Cartel. These were professionals. "Emily," he whispered, "we've been made." Before she could answer, a shot rang out, and the rock just inches from her exploded in a burst of sand and stone. "Move!" They sprinted downhill as gunfire tore through the air behind them. Jack's foot slipped on loose gravel, but Emily yanked him upright. Bullets kicked up dust all around them. Jack dove behind a ridge as Emily fired 2 controlled bursts toward the snipers. One dropped, the others scattered. They kept moving, racing toward the truck they'd hidden behind a dry creek bed. "They had our location," Jack shouted as they ran. Emily's voice was tight. "The phones, those Cartel burners, they were tagged." They reached the truck, and Emily yanked open the door just as another shot shattered the driver's side mirror. She didn't flinch, just slammed it into gear and tore across the desert. Behind them, the ridge burned in the rising sun. They weren't just being followed anymore, they were being hunted. The drive north was long, hot, and silent. Emily barely said a word. Her eyes never left the road. Jack sat beside her, bruised and bloodied from the ambush, trying to piece it all together. In less than a day, they'd gone from running cargo for ICE to being in the crosshairs of a private army, led by a ghost named El Silencio. How far? "Here's this guy," Jack finally asked. Emily's jaw tightened. 2 hours. Maybe less if the roads stay clear. "And you trust him?" She gave a humorless laugh. "Trust is a luxury. I just know he hates losing." That wasn't comforting. They passed through a forgotten town near the Texas-New Mexico border, all boarded up diners and sun-faded gas stations. Jack could feel the history in the place, 1,000 secrets buried under every inch of desert. "You ever come through?" "Here before?" he asked. Emily nodded once. "Back when I was someone else." By the time they reached their destination, the sun was dropping low behind jagged hills. Emily pulled the truck off the main road and down a gravel trail hidden by mesquite and barbed wire. It led to a compound surrounded by rusted shipping containers, a few trailers, and a half-buried satellite dish that hummed like it had a mind of its own. "This is where your guy lives?" Jack asked, eyebrows raised. "He doesn't live," Emily said. "He hides." They stopped at a rusted gate. Emily stepped out first, moving slow, hands visible, no sudden moves. Jack followed her lead, keeping a cautious eye on the surrounding hills. Then a voice echoed from a speaker overhead, raspy, mechanical, and cold. "You should have stayed dead, Valdez." Jack blinked. "Valdez?" Emily didn't flinch. "Nice to hear your voice, Bishop." A long pause. Then the gate creaked open. Inside, the air smelled like oil and dust. Tech junk was piled everywhere. Wires, radios, busted drones, old servers blinking like haunted machines. And in the middle of it all, sitting in a lawn chair with a shotgun across his lap, was Bishop. He looked like a man who'd seen the end of the world and decided to move in. Long silver hair tied back, one eye covered with a digital patch, worn camo pants and a patched-up hoodie that said, "Defy Systems." "Still picking fights with billion-dollar monsters, huh?" he said, standing slowly. Emily cracked a small smile. They started it. Jack watched the two of them with curiosity. They didn't hug, didn't shake hands, but something passed between them, old respect maybe, or unfinished war. Bishop turned his gaze to Jack. "And this guy?" "Ice contractor," Emily said. "Got caught in the storm." Jack offered a nod. "Name's Jack." Bishop stared for a beat, then smirked. "You look like you still believe in law and order. Cute." "Let's just say I'm adjusting." Emily pulled the flash drive from her pocket and tossed it on a metal workbench cluttered with circuit boards. "We need this uploaded. Unfiltered, no trail. You still got reach? Bishop raised an eyebrow. I always got reach, but it depends. Who you're trying to burn. El silencio, she said. The room went still, even the machines seemed to go quiet. Bishop picked up the drive, looked at it like it might bite him. You sure you want to poke that dragon? Emily's voice was calm but steady. He's got my sister. Bishop sighed. Damn it, Valdez, you always did have a hero complex. I'm not the hero, she said. I'm the consequence. He plugged the drive into a terminal. Old screens lit up, flickering like dying stars. Lines of code scrolled faster than Jack could track. Bishop's hands moved like a symphony. Clack, clack, clack of keys, muttered curses, data bouncing across ghost servers and old NSA backdoors. You're lucky I still have this infrastructure, he muttered. Most of my old contacts went. Corporate. The rest are dead. Jack looked around. How did you two meet? Emily didn't answer. Bishop did. She saved my life in Guatemala. I was running signals for a black cell op gone sideways. Got pinned in a jungle with 3 rounds left and no way out. Then she shows up, dripping in blood, dragging a cartel lieutenant by the throat, and says, You're coming with me, if you want to live. Jack blinked. Seriously, Emily shrugged. He was the only one who knew how to track the sat beacon we needed. Couldn't let him die. Bishop smiled. And now she wants me to piss off the most dangerous man on the continent. He turned to her. You do realize what's going to happen if this goes wide? Emily nodded. He'll come for us. Jack frowned. He already is. Bishop pulled a cigarette from a tin, lit it with a cracked Zippo. Fine, I'll help. But once this data hits the feeds, we've got maybe 72 hours before his digital mercs start wiping everything. He'll cut power to cities just to erase one camera feed. He stared at her. After that, you better have a damn good plan. Emily looked him straight in the eye. We go back. We find Isabel. We end him. Bishop laughed once, low and bitter. You really are insane. I missed that. As the data uploaded into the void, a countdown appeared on the screen. Upload in progress. 21%. They had a window. Small. Closing fast. And somewhere in the dark, El Silencio had just heard a whisper with Emily Valdez's name on it. The sound of the server hums echoed through Bishop's shack as the last files uploaded, vanishing into the ether. Emily's eyes were focused on the screen, her body taut with the anticipation of what was to come. She had pushed Bishop's limits, and now there was no turning back. Once the data hit the feeds, the countdown would begin, and they had no idea how far-reaching El Silencio's network really was. Download complete, Bishop muttered. You've just signed your death sentence, Valdez. Emily didn't flinch. I'm not dead yet. Jack stood by the door, scanning the horizon through the cracked window, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. So what now? He asked. Bishop exhaled a plume of smoke. Now, you start making moves. You think you can waltz into a fortress. That's probably got satellite surveillance, drones and mercenaries out the wazoo. Emily locked eyes with him. We'll find a way in. I've got someone who knows the inside. Bishop scoffed. You've got a lot of people with inside knowledge, but it doesn't change the fact that this is a damn fortress. Even if you get in, they won't make it out alive. Emily's voice was ice cold. I'm not leaving without Isabel. Bishop leaned back in his chair, eyeing her like she was a ticking time bomb. Fine, but you're going to need more than just your little flash drive and a prayer. He was right. If they were going to have any hope of infiltrating the compound, they needed someone who had walked those hellish halls, someone who could guide them through the labyrinth of walls and gunfire, not just with intel, but with the experience of having lived there. Emily exhaled slowly. I know someone, but it's not going to be easy. Jack raised an eyebrow. Who? Emily didn't answer right away. Her mind drifted to a name she had sworn she would never say again. The night was dark as they drove south again, the engine of their truck humming against the backdrop of the desolate landscape. Emily didn't speak for the entire trip. She couldn't afford to dwell on the person she was about to call. The emotions that followed that name were dangerous, and in a situation like this, weakness could get them killed. They reached a small, nondescript motel on the outskirts of El Paso. As the truck came to a stop, Jack glanced at Emily. "You know where we're going, right?" Emily nodded. "I do." Inside, the walls of the run-down motel room were stained with years of neglect. But it was clean, and the air smelled faintly of old coffee. She walked straight to the phone on the nightstand and dialed a number she knew by heart, even though she hadn't called it in years. The line clicked after 2 rings. "You've got 10 seconds before I hang up." The voice on the other end was gravelly, cold and familiar. "Don't hang up," Emily said quickly. "I need your help." The silence on the other end stretched before he finally spoke. "Valdez." His voice was low, almost amused. "I thought you'd be dead by now." "I'm still breathing. But that might change if you don't pick up the phone." "You've got a lot of nerve calling me after everything that happened. After the betrayal." Emily's jaw tightened. She wasn't here for any emotional drama. "I need access to El Silencio's compound, his fortress, south of Juarez. I need someone who knows the inside, someone who's been there." The other end was silent for a long time. Then, "You're still looking to save the girl, huh?" "Yes." He chuckled, a dark, bitter sound. "You're making a huge mistake, Valdez." "I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm asking for your help." There was another long pause before he finally spoke again. "I can help you, but it's going to cost you. Big." Emily had known the price would come. She had already prepared herself for it. "What's the cost?" "Your soul," he said softly, "and maybe your life. Meet me at the old warehouse on 9th, midnight. I'll have the coordinates for you." The line went dead before Emily could say anything else. Jack raised an eyebrow as Emily hung up the phone. What was that about? She didn't answer immediately. She simply grabbed her bag and stood. "We're not going in alone. We're meeting someone who knows the terrain better than anyone, but he's not someone I trust anymore." Jack looked at her. "You don't trust him, but you're willing to bring him in?" Emily nodded, walking toward the door. "Sometimes the only way to get to the enemy is through the devil himself." The warehouse was on the outskirts of El Paso, forgotten by time, a place where shadows hid more than just dust. It was a place where criminals, former soldiers, and forgotten men came to meet and to disappear. At the far corner of the lot, a black SUV waited under a single flickering streetlight. As they pulled up, the man stepped out of the shadows. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and as scarred as the desert he lived in. His eyes were cold, calculating. His name was Tomas the Ghost Rivera. He was the one Emily had betrayed years ago, and now he was the only person who could help them. He gave her a slow, dangerous smile as she stepped out of the truck. "Valdez, still alive, huh?" "I never said I was easy to kill," Emily replied flatly. Tomas didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I know why you're here. You want to get inside El Silencio's place, right?" Emily nodded. "You're the only one who can help us. You've worked for him before." "Worked for him, yes. Been inside that hellhole, yes." He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "But I don't do favors, Valdez. Not for free." Emily didn't flinch. "What do you want?" Tomas looked her over, his gaze piercing. "I want you to admit what you did. Admit you turned your back on me when I needed you most. I want the apology I never got." Jack looked between them, sensing the tension. "You two have history?" Emily didn't answer. Instead, she walked up to Tomas, standing close enough that she could feel his breath on her skin. "Fine," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I betrayed you. I'm sorry. I did what I had to do." Tomas smirked, satisfaction glimmering in his eyes. "Good. That's all I needed to hear." He turned to Jack. "You want to live through this? You follow my lead. I've got eyes inside that fortress. I'll get you in, but you better be ready to burn every bridge behind you." Jack looked at Emily, then nodded. "We're ready." Tomas gave them the coordinates, his voice cool and detached. "You'll need to move fast. I can only help you once. After that, you're on your own." Emily didn't hesitate. "Let's go." They had their guide. Now all they had to do was break into a fortress run by a man who was more legend than reality, and save the girl who still haunted Emily's every thought. But as the hours ticked down, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The desert was vast, stretching endlessly beneath the cloudless night sky. The truck's headlights cut through the blackness, casting long shadows on the cracked dirt road that led them deeper into hostile territory. Emily sat in the back with Tomas, while Jack drove, keeping his eyes locked on the road ahead. There was no talking, just the hum of the engine and the sound of the tires crunching against the rough terrain. Emily's mind was elsewhere, replaying every step that had led them here. They were about to walk straight into the heart of the beast, El Silencio's compound, a fortress built on isolation, guarded by men with no faces and no morals, the kind of men who didn't hesitate to kill you for a glance in the wrong direction. And they weren't going in blind. Tomas had the blueprints. He knew the compound like the back of his hand. He'd been an insider for years, doing dirty work under El Silencio's command before he vanished off the radar. Now he was a ghost. And ghosts, as Emily had learned, weren't always the most trustworthy allies. Still sure about this? Tomas asked, breaking the silence. Emily didn't look at him. She couldn't. We don't have a choice, Tomas chuckled darkly. Always the soldier, never a choice. Jack shifted uneasily in his seat. I don't like this. We're heading straight into enemy territory. We don't even know what we're walking into. Emily turned her head to look at him, her eyes hard. We knew this would be dangerous from the start. If you want to back out, now's the time. Jack didn't respond immediately. His grip tightened on the wheel, knuckles going white. No, let's finish this. The truck rolled over a rise, and in the distance, the dark silhouette of this compound came into view. It was a fortress built into the side of a mountain like a modern-day stronghold. Walls topped with razor wire, watchtowers in every corner, and lights cutting through the night like search beams. Tomas leaned forward, pointing at a narrow pass to the east. That's our way in. The west side's too hot. Too many guards. Emily nodded. We stick to the plan. Get in, get Isabel, and get out. Jack turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. And what if we can't? Emily's jaw tightened. We don't have a backup plan. This is it. Tomas smirked. Always the optimist. They took the detour, moving through the narrow, rocky path that led them around the perimeter. The sea. Truck crept along, the engine barely making a sound. Emily's eyes darted to every shadow, every movement. They couldn't afford to be caught. If they were, this would be the end. The pass led them to a hidden side entrance, just large enough for the truck to fit through. Tomas instructed Jack to stop, and Emily quickly slipped out, followed by Tomas. They crouched low, moving silently toward a small building near the entrance. Tomas gestured for them to follow him, and they made their way inside, where they would lay low until they got the signal. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy, cold. The air smelled like rust and sweat. It wasn't just the compound that felt suffocating. It was the feeling of being so close to El Silencio, the man who had orchestrated countless atrocities without a second thought. The time was coming. Now we wait, Tomas whispered. When I say go, we move. Stick to the shadows. No noise. Emily didn't need to be told twice. She knew what was at stake. They crouched in the shadows, the silence pressing in around them. Tomas had already started to set up a series of comms, linking them into the compound's surveillance system. Emily watched him with a keen eye. She didn't trust him, not fully, but right now he was their only chance of getting inside and out without being caught. A soft beep echoed through the room as the comms connected. Tomas glanced at the screen. All right, we're in. I've got access to the security cameras. He tapped a few buttons, bringing up a live feed of the compound's interior. There were guards patrolling in sets, moving in tight, synchronized rotations. But there was a flaw in their system, a gap, a weakness. Emily's gaze narrowed on the PHY screen. We'll take the south side, quiet, no confrontation. Got it, Tomas muttered. The minutes dragged on. Every second felt like an hour. Emily's mind raced as she thought of Isabel, her sister, the girl she had failed to protect all these years. But now she had the chance to fix it, to make it right. She wouldn't fail again. Not this time. Finally, Tomas gave the signal, we. Move, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They slipped out of the building, moving in the shadows, their bodies pressed low against the walls of the compound. Every step felt heavy, like they were carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. They stayed close to each other, and Jack kept a hand on his weapon, eyes constantly scanning for movement. They reached the outer perimeter of the inner compound, where the first set of guards passed by. The trio held their breath as the guards walked right by, oblivious to their presence. Tomas led them to a maintenance door, a small, inconspicuous entrance that he had memorized. Tomas looked around one last time before punching in the access code on the keypad. The door clicked open and they slipped inside. Inside, the compound was even darker, more foreboding. Hallways stretched out before them, dimly lit by flickering overhead lights. The air was thick with the smell of old, stagnant. Seru. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. They moved quickly, following the path that Tomas had memorized. They were getting closer, closer to Isabel. But as they neared the center of the compound, Emily felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Something wasn't right. It was too quiet, too still. Then the alarms went off. The shrill sound of the alarm pierced the silence, a high-pitched wail that echoed through the compound. Emily's heart slammed in her chest as the sound reverberated. Off the concrete walls. They were caught. Shit! Jack cursed under his breath, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. We've been compromised. Tomas spun on his heel, his face pale with frustration. This wasn't supposed to happen. We were supposed to be invisible. Emily's mind raced. They needed to move fast. They couldn't afford to be cornered inside the compound with the alarm blaring, alerting every guard to their location. The door they just entered was the only way in, and now it was their only way out. We've got to get to Isabel now, Emily said, her voice tight with urgency. We don't have much time. Tomas didn't hesitate. He led the way down, the narrow corridor, his steps quick but deliberate. Jack and Emily followed close behind, keeping low, as the sound of footsteps grew louder in the distance. The compound was coming alive. Guards were already starting to flood the hallways, and security cameras pivoted toward the sounds of movement. Emily could feel the heat of the building pressing down on her. Every step felt like it was taking them closer to the danger, but they had no choice. Left, Tomas ordered, as they reached a four-way intersection. The holding cells are just ahead. Emily's mind flashed back to Isabel, the terrified girl who had been locked away for so long, a pawn in El Silencio's twisted game. She couldn't let him win. Not after everything they'd been through. They moved down the hallway quickly, trying to stay as quiet as possible. But then the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, closer. The patrol was moving straight for them. Shit, Jack muttered, grabbing Emily's arm and pulling her into a nearby storage closet. Tomas slid in after them, shutting the door as quietly as possible. The three of them held their breath, listening to the guards pass by. Emily's pulse thudded in her ears as the footsteps came closer. The sound of boots hitting the floor was deafening in the narrow space. She could hear their conversation, low but still audible. I heard they had some kind of breach in Sector B. We've got to clear it out before El Silencio gets pissed. You think it's an escape attempt? Could be. But the system says the target is still in her cell. We're on high alert. The guards passed, unaware that Emily and her team were only inches away, hidden in the shadows. It took everything Emily had not to make a sound. If they were caught now, it would all be over. The footsteps faded, and Emily exhaled slowly, silently. They were safe for the moment. Tomas looked at her, his expression grim. We need to move fast. If they're onto us, they'll be locking down all the exits soon. Jack nodded. Let's go. They slipped out of the closet and continued down the hallway. Emily's mind was laser-focused on the mission. Every moment counted. Every decision mattered. They reached the holding area, a row of reinforced steel doors that led to individual cells. Emily didn't waste time. She pulled a small device from her jacket pocket and attached it to the security panel on the door. A soft beep confirmed that it was unlocking, but before the door fully opened, a voice echoed down the hall. Freeze! Emily's heart stopped. She spun around, eyes locking with the guard at the end of the hallway. He had his weapon drawn, aiming directly at them. Tomas instinctively raised his own gun, but Jack was faster. Without hesitation, he fired a shot, precise and quick, striking the guard square in the chest. The guard collapsed to the floor, and the alarm blared louder, signaling a breach in Sector A. The silence that followed was deafening, and Emily knew it was only a matter of time before more guards arrived. Tomas yanked open the cell door, revealing Isabel, disheveled, bruised, but very much alive. "Isabel!" Emily shouted as she rushed inside, wrapping her arms around her sister. Isabel winced but clung to her tightly. "I knew you'd come for me," Isabel whispered, her voice shaking. "We don't have time," Emily said, her voice hard with urgency. "We need to move now." Jack was already checking the hallway, his eyes darting from one end to the other. "We're not alone," he said tersely. "Get her moving. We've got company." Emily nodded. She pulled Isabel up to her feet and helped her out of the cell, keeping a protective arm around her. "Come on," Emily urged, leading the way as they moved quickly down the corridor. But the hallways weren't as empty as they had hoped. As they turned a corner, a group of armed guards appeared, closing in fast. Emily didn't hesitate. She pulled out her own weapon and fired. The first guard went down with a shot to the leg. Tomas took out 2 others, and Jack finished the last. 1. The sound of the gunfire echoed through the compound, and Emily's heart raced. "Keep moving," Tomas barked. "They'll be onto us in seconds." They sprinted down the corridor, making their way toward the exit. The compound was in full lockdown now, with guards everywhere searching for them. At the end of the hall, Emily saw a door that led to the outside, the same door they had entered earlier. But as they approached, they saw something that made their blood run cold. More guards. And behind them, El Silencio's right-hand man, Raúl, a man with a reputation for being ruthless. He stepped forward, a grin on his face. "Did you really think you could just walk in and out of my fortress?" Raúl's voice echoed in the hall. Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Raúl," he smiled wider, pulling out his gun. "You're not going anywhere." The cold barrel of Raúl's gun gleamed under the flickering overhead lights as he took slow, deliberate steps toward Emily, Isabel, Tomas, and Jack. The sound of their breathing was the only noise in the hallway, drowning out everything else. As the 4 of them stood frozen, knowing there was no easy way out now, Raúl's grin widened, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the scene. "I have to admit I'm impressed. Most people who try to break into my compound don't even make it this far." Emily's pulse hammered in her throat. She wasn't afraid of Raúl. She was afraid of what he represented. He wasn't just a thug. He was the muscle of El Silencio, the man who made sure every deal, every shipment, every dirty operation ran smoothly, and he was standing between them and freedom. "We're not here to play your games," Emily said, her voice cold but steady. "Let us go and I'll forget you were ever part of this." Raúl chuckled darkly, his grip tightening on the gun. "You think I'm going to let you leave with her? No, I've got orders to bring you all in, alive or dead." Tomas took a step forward, his eyes locked on Raúl's gun, calculating the distance, the angles. "For you don't have to do this, Raúl. We both know this isn't the life you wanted." Raúl's eyes flickered for just a moment, the faintest hint of hesitation passing across his face, before it was replaced by that same arrogant smirk. "You think I care about what I want. I care about what El Silencio wants, and he wants you dead." Emily stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "Then you can tell him we're coming for him next." Raúl's expression darkened, and before Emily could react, he raised his gun. But Emily was quicker. With lightning speed, she pulled out her own weapon and fired a single shot. The sound of gunfire cracked through the air, but it wasn't aimed at Raúl. Instead, she shot the overhead light above him. The hallway was plunged into darkness, and, for a brief moment, everyone was blind. "Now!" Emily shouted. In that split second of chaos they moved. Jack and Tomas surged forward, each taking a different path to outflank Raúl, using the cover of darkness to stay hidden. Isabel instinctively clung to Emily, keeping close, not making a sound. Raúl growled in frustration, his hand instinctively reaching for his flashlight. He switched it on, sweeping the beam across the hallway. But before he could get a clear shot, Tomas lunged from the side, tackling him to the ground. Raúl grunted as the 2 men struggled for control, fists flying, a blur of movement in the dark. Jack was already on the move, his gun trained on the shadows. He stayed low, keeping his movements fluid and controlled, searching for an opening. "Get her out of here," Tomas shouted between gritted teeth, wrestling with Raúl on the floor. Emily didn't wait for another order. She grabbed Isabel by the arm and pulled her forward, guiding her down the hallway. "Keep moving," she hissed, her voice urgent, but just as they neared the exit, another burst of gunfire rang out. Emily ducked instinctively, pulling Isabel to the side as bullets ricocheted off the walls. "Damn it," Jack cursed as he dropped to the floor beside them, keeping his head down. "We're pinned." The fight wasn't over yet. Raúl wasn't down for long. He rolled to his feet, drawing another weapon from his belt. The fight in the dark was starting to give way to the light as Raúl's flashlight illuminated the space. "We're not going anywhere," Raúl spat, a sneer twisting his features. Tomas was already back on his feet, sweat dripping from his face. He was winded but still dangerous. He moved toward Raúl, weaving between the beams of light. "Emily, get her out now," Tomas shouted as he pushed Raúl back against the wall. "I'll hold him off." Emily hesitated for a split second. She didn't want to leave him, but there was no time to argue. Jack was already pulling Isabel in the opposite direction, guiding her toward the exit. "Move!" Jack growled, his voice tense. Reluctantly, Emily followed Jack and Isabel, glancing back once more to see Tomas and Raúl in a brutal standoff. It was a fight neither side could afford to lose. They reached the exit door, but as Emily tried to push it open, something hit her with a sudden, bone-chilling realization. It was locked from the outside. "Shit," Emily muttered under her breath, pulling on the door handle, her mind racing. They were trapped. They weren't out yet. "We're stuck," she shouted to Jack, who was scanning their surroundings, searching for another way out. Tomas's voice echoed from behind them, urgent. "The service tunnel, it's on your left." Without thinking, Emily and Jack sprinted in the direction Tomas had indicated. Isabel's breath came in ragged gasps, her fear almost tangible. "Stay close," Emily said, urging Isabel to pick up the pace. They reached a small, unmarked door, hidden behind a stack of crates. Jack kicked it open with one swift motion. It was a cramped, narrow passageway, but it was their only shot. Emily shoved Isabel inside, followed by Jack, then quickly shut the door behind them. They were in the dark once again, but the distant sounds of gunfire were muffled now, farther away. Emily leaned against the cool wall, trying to catch her breath. The tension in her body didn't ease. "We're not out of the woods yet," Jack said, his voice low. "They'll be looking for us down here." Emily nodded, wiping the sweat from her brow. "We keep moving. We find a way to get out." Just as they started to move forward, the sound of boots echoed through the tunnel behind them. "Someone was coming." "Stay quiet," Emily whispered, holding her breath as she and Jack pressed Isabel against the wall. The footsteps grew louder, closer, but this time they weren't alone in the darkness. The sound of boots grew louder. Each step echoed off the cold, damp walls of the tunnel. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she pressed her back against the narrow passage, holding her breath. The dim light from Jack's flashlight barely illuminated the dark space in front of them, casting long shadows on the walls. Emily glanced over at Isabel, who was trembling, her eyes wide with fear. Emily's heart ached. She had to get her sister out of here. She had promised, and she wasn't about to break that promise now. Jack was crouched low, his eyes scanning the tunnel ahead. His hand was on his weapon, ready for anything. "Stay quiet," he whispered. "If they see us, it's over." The footsteps paused. A cold sweat ran down Emily's spine. Were they standing right outside the door? Was this it? Then, a voice pierced the tension in the air. "Check the tunnel, they're bound to be in here somewhere." It was a guard, another one coming their way. Emily's mind raced. They couldn't stay here. The longer they waited, the closer the guards would get. They were trapped, and the walls were closing in. "We need a plan," Emily whispered, her voice tight. Jack nodded, his expression grim. "We move when they pass. Stay low, move fast." Suddenly the footsteps resumed, moving away from their hiding spot. Emily held her breath, praying that they wouldn't stop or turn around. The guards were just feet away now. She could hear them talking in hushed voices as they moved down the tunnel. "Just keep going," Jack muttered. "Wait for them to get further ahead." The seconds felt like hours. But finally the footsteps began to fade, growing distant as the guards walked farther down the tunnel. Emily exhaled in relief. It wasn't over, but they had a small window. "Now's our chance," Jack said. "Let's move." Emily turned to Isabel. gently taking her by the arm. "Stay close," she said softly. "We're getting out of here. We just have to stay quiet and keep moving." They hurried through the tunnel, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the stone floor. It was dark, cramped and claustrophobic, but Emily focused on the goal, getting Isabel to safety. The path twisted and turned, narrowing at certain points, forcing them to squeeze through tight spaces. Emily could feel her heart pounding in her chest as they navigated the labyrinth beneath the compound. Suddenly Jack froze. He raised his hand, signaling for them to stop. He pressed his ear to the wall, listening intently. Emily held her breath. What now? After a tense moment, Jack lowered his hand. "There's another group of guards up ahead," he whispered. "We need to find another way around." Tomas was still back at the compound, fighting Raoul, and there was no way Emily could afford to wait. They had to keep moving. But with the guards closing in and the exit still far away, time was running out. "We can't go back," Emily said, her voice firm. "We'll find another way." Jack nodded, his face set in determination. "Let's go, follow me." He led the group down another narrow passage, this one darker and more oppressive than the others. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and dust. It felt like the walls were closing in on them with every step they took. Suddenly, Emily heard a noise behind them, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. And then voices. "Did you hear that?" "Shh! Stay quiet, I swear I heard something." They had been spotted. Emily's heart leaped into her throat. There was nowhere to hide. They were running out of time. "Move!" Jack barked. "We have no choice." They broke into a run, the sound of the guards' pursuit growing louder. Emily pushed Isabel ahead, urging her to go faster. Her own legs burned as she ran, but she couldn't afford to slow down. Not now. Not when they were so close. The tunnel stretched on, but there was still no sign of an exit. They were trapped in the dark, with only their wits and speed to rely. But then ahead, a faint light flickered in the distance. Emily's pulse surged with hope. Could it be the exit? "Keep going," she shouted. "We're almost there." They raced toward the light, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The guards were right behind them, closing the distance. Just as they reached the opening, Emily's heart stopped. There was a heavy steel door blocking their way. "No!" Emily screamed, pounding her fist against the metal. "We can't be!" "Stuck here!" Jack didn't waste a second. He stepped forward, pulling out a small tool from his belt. In a matter of seconds, he was working on the lock. His movements were swift, calculated. "Come on," Jack muttered under his breath. "Come on." The sound of footsteps was almost deafening now. They were almost upon them. Then, with a soft click, the lock disengaged. The door creaked open, and Emily wasted no time. She pushed Isabel through the opening, followed by Jack. But as she stepped through, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. A sharp cry echoed from behind them. The guards had arrived. "Run!" Jack shouted as he grabbed Emily's arm and pulled her forward. They were outside now, the cool night air hitting them like a wave. But it wasn't over. They were still in enemy territory, and the guards were closing in fast. "We're not done yet," Emily shouted, urging Isabel to move faster. Jack grabbed his radio. "Tomas, we've got the girl. We're making our way out. Cover us." No answer. "Tomas," Jack repeated, his voice tight with anxiety. Still nothing. Emily's stomach twisted. Where was Tomas? They ran through the compound's back alley, their steps echoing in the darkness. The sound of gunfire echoed from inside, a reminder that they weren't out of danger yet. They had to get to the extraction point, fast. The cold night air hit Emily's face as they sprinted through the back alley, their footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. The faint glow of the compound's lights barely reached them, but they could hear the shouts of the guards and the distant sounds of gunfire. They were still in the middle of enemy territory, and every second they spent in this maze was another second closer to their inevitable capture or worse. "Faster!" Emily shouted, pushing Isabel forward. Her sister, still shaking with fear, stumbled but kept going. She didn't have a choice. None of them did. Jack led the way, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "Keep moving. Don't look back," he muttered, his voice a low growl. "We're almost there." Emily's heart was pounding in her chest, but she couldn't afford to lose focus. Not now. They had to reach the extraction point, where their only hope of survival waited. If they didn't get there in time, the cartel would catch up with them, and the consequences would be fatal. They turned a corner and found themselves at the edge of a narrow road. A dilapidated van sat parked on the side, its engine running. Emily's eyes flicked toward Jack, and he nodded. This was it. Their ticket out. "Get in," Jack ordered, ushering Isabel inside first. Emily followed, taking a quick look over her shoulder before slamming the door behind her. The van lurched forward, its tires screeching as they tore down. The road, heading for the hills in the distance. But as the van picked up speed, Emily could feel the unease building in her gut. Something didn't feel right. "Where's Thomas?" she asked, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and frustration. Jack's jaw clenched, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. "He's still at the compound. I couldn't get a hold of him on the radio." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? He's not coming?" Jack shook his head, his face grim. "I don't know. He was supposed to meet us at the extraction point. Something's wrong." The van swerved around a sharp corner, narrowly avoiding a guard post up ahead. They were moving fast, but the sounds of pursuit, the growl of engines and the distant bursts of gunfire, told Emily that the cartel was closing in on them. "They're coming for us," Isabel whispered, her face pale. "Stay down," Emily instructed, as she crouched lower in the seat, trying to remain out of sight. "Jack, we need to lose them. Can you take a detour?" Jack's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. "They're right on our tail. I'm not sure how much farther we can go before we run out of road." Emily gritted her teeth. She had to think fast. The van was their lifeline, but if they couldn't shake the pursuers, they wouldn't make it out alive. She grabbed her radio. "Tomas, do you copy?" The static buzzed through the speaker, but there was no response. Emily cursed under her breath, frustration building. Tomas had been their rock. If he wasn't coming, they were in deep trouble. "Jack, take the next right. There's a dead-end alley. We can use it to buy us some time." Jack's eyes narrowed as he glanced at her, his expression conflicted. "That's a risky move, Emily. We'll be trapped if we go in." "We don't have a choice," Emily snapped. "We can't keep running in the open." The van swerved. Right, the tires screeching as they turned onto the narrow alley. Emily glanced out the side window, looking for any sign of the cartel's pursuit. She could see headlights getting closer, but they hadn't caught up yet. "This is our shot," Emily said, her voice tense. "We take a hard left at the end, then head toward the hills. There's an old hideout up there." Jack didn't hesitate. He pushed the accelerator, the engine roaring as they tore down the alley. The guards were almost on them now. Emily could hear the screeching of tires, the rapid-fire bursts of gunfire. But as they reached the end of the alley, the unexpected happened. From the shadows, a familiar figure emerged. "Tomas!" Emily shouted in disbelief. Tomas was standing in the middle of the road, his weapon raised, his expression a mix of relief and anger. "What the hell are you doing here?" Emily gasped as Jack slammed on the brakes, the van screeching to a halt just in time. Tomas lowered his weapon, his eyes scanning the road behind him. "I had to take care of a few things. We don't have time to explain. Get in the damn van." Before Emily could protest, he opened the side door, jumping into the back with them. "Go now." Jack didn't need another order. He slammed the gas pedal, and the van shot forward, tires squealing as they raced down the road. "We're not out of the woods yet," Tomas said, his voice low and urgent. "They know where we are now." Emily glanced back, seeing the faint lights of pursuit in the distance. She could feel the pressure mounting. There was no telling how long they could outrun the cartel, especially with the resources they had at their disposal. "Where's Raul?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "Is he still after us?" Tomas shook his head, wiping the blood from his face. "Raul's out of the picture. I handled him." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Handled him? What does that mean?" Tomas smirked. "He's no longer a threat, but don't get too comfortable. We're not in the clear yet." Emily turned back to face the front of the van, her mind racing. She knew they were still far from safe. The cartel would stop at nothing to get to them. "We need a plan," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We need to get to the extraction point. We can't afford to waste any more time." Jack nodded, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. "I'm with you. We'll get there." The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They weren't going down without a fight. The van lurched over the rough terrain as Jack pushed the accelerator harder, the engine roaring against the rocky road. The narrow trail twisted through dense trees, barely wide enough for the van to squeeze through. The moonlight barely pierced the canopy above, casting the world below in shadow. Emily could hear the sound of distant engines, but for now they were out of sight. "We're running out of time," Thomas muttered, his eyes constantly darting between the rearview mirror and the dark path ahead. His earlier calm demeanor had been replaced by a tight, anxious expression. It was obvious that despite his bravado, the situation was slipping out of their control. Emily could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. They had narrowly escaped the cartel's grasp once, but that didn't mean they were safe, not by a long shot. The cartel had eyes everywhere, and it was only a matter of time before they closed in. "How much further?" Emily asked, her voice steady despite the growing fear clawing at her. Jack glanced over at her, his jaw set in determination. "We're close, just another 5 miles or so. But after that, it's a climb. We're going up the hills. I know. A place where we can hide out for a while, but it won't be easy. We'll need to move fast, and it's not the most secure location." Emily nodded, focusing her thoughts on the task ahead. If they could make it to the hideout, they might stand a chance, but the cartel was relentless. She had no illusions about how difficult this was going to be. Isabel, still sitting close to Emily, gripped her sister's hand tightly. She looked terrified, her eyes wide with exhaustion. Emily squeezed her hand back, trying to offer her some sense of security, even though she didn't feel secure herself. "We're going to make it," Emily said, her voice firm, more for Isabel's sake than her own. "We just need to stay focused." As they drove deeper into the forest, the sound of their tires crunching over gravel was the only noise that filled the air. The world outside the van was a blur of trees and darkness. It was almost peaceful. But Emily knew better than to let her guard down. Suddenly a radio crackled from Tomas's belt. He grabbed it, pressing it to his ear, his face tightening. "Talk to me," he said, his voice low and tense. There was a brief pause, and then a voice crackled through, muffled but recognizable. "Tomas," the voice said urgently, "you need to hurry. The cartel has a convoy moving toward your position. They'll be there in less than an hour. You need to be out of there, now." Emily's stomach dropped. She had known it was coming, but hearing it confirmed made it feel all the more real. The cartel wasn't just after them now. They were coordinating a full-scale pursuit. "We don't have an hour," Tomas growled, slamming his fist against the van's dashboard. "We'll make it, but we need to step on it. Jack, push it." Jack didn't need any more prompting. He slammed his foot down on the accelerator, and the van shot forward, the tires screeching as they veered onto a narrow, treacherous path that led up the hillside. The trees grew thicker here, and the road became steeper, forcing Jack to navigate carefully. Behind them, the sound of engines grew louder again, this time closer. Emily could hear the growl of more vehicles speeding through the woods in pursuit. The cartel had mobilized. Tomas turned to Emily, his eyes sharp. "We need to get to the top of the hill. There's a clearing up there. I'll set up a perimeter. We'll make our stand." Emily's stomach churned. She wasn't thrilled with the idea of making a stand, but she knew there was no choice. They couldn't keep running forever. If they didn't stop to make a plan, they would be caught. Jack's hands were steady on the wheel, but even he couldn't mask the tension in his eyes. "I'll get us there," he said, his voice clipped. "Stay ready." The van bounced over rocks, swerving dangerously as Jack fought to maintain control on the uneven road. The noise of the pursuing cartel vehicles grew louder and louder, until Emily could hear the faint rumble of their engines just behind them. "We're not going to outrun them much longer," Emily said, her voice rising in urgency. "How far to the clearing?" "Not far," Tomas replied, looking out the window with a focused intensity. "We're almost there." Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the night. Emily whipped her head toward the sound. It was gunfire. "They're shooting at us," Isabel gasped, her voice trembling. "Hold on!" Jack shouted, swerving to avoid another burst of gunfire that barely missed the side of the van. The headlights ahead revealed shadows moving quickly through the trees, and Emily knew they were closing in. "Get ready," Tomas said, already reaching for the weapon at his side. "When we hit the clearing, we go straight for cover. No hesitation. The tension in the van was palpable. They were close now. The top of the hill was just ahead, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this was it. They were going to have to fight their way out. The van hit the crest of the hill, the clearing ahead coming into view. Jack didn't hesitate. He slammed the brakes, and the van screeched to a halt, its tires kicking up dust as they skidded to. "Stop! Out now!" Tomas barked, already climbing out of the van and grabbing his gear. Emily's heart raced as she followed him, pulling Isabel along with her. The moment their feet hit the ground, the sound of gunfire erupted from behind them. The cartel was here. Jack was already sprinting toward a cluster of trees, using them as cover. Emily ran after him, dragging Isabel along as Tomas stayed behind, covering their retreat. "Go, go, go!" Tomas yelled, firing back at the approaching cartel vehicles. Emily's breath was coming in shallow gasps as she reached the trees, pressing her back against the rough bark. The air was thick with tension, and the ground beneath her feet felt unstable, as though the very earth itself was shaking in fear. "Get to the cabin!" Jack shouted over the noise of the gunfire. "Now!" They bolted toward the small weathered cabin in the distance, a shack hidden deep within the woods. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. They had to make it. The door of the dilapidated cabin creaked as Emily slammed it shut behind them, her heart still pounding from the adrenaline. Her breathing came in quick, shallow gasps as she pressed her back against the rotting wood, trying to gather her thoughts. The cabin was a tiny structure, barely more than a shack, tucked away in the dense woods. The only light inside came from the dim glow of the moon, seeping through cracks in the walls. It was barely enough to make out the outline of old furniture, dust-covered surfaces, and forgotten memories. But right now, it was their only sanctuary. "We're safe for now," Tomas said, his voice low but firm as he scanned the room. His hand hovered near the holster of his weapon, his eyes darting toward the small boarded-up windows. Jack was already at the window, peering through the cracks. "I don't think they saw us come in," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "But they're not going to stop looking." Emily's mind was racing. They'd been running for hours and the cartel was still hot on their tail. She couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her. They were trapped in the woods with limited supplies, no backup, and an enemy that would stop at nothing to find them. "Isabel," Emily said softly, turning to her sister, "stay low, stay quiet. Don't make a sound unless we say so." Isabel nodded, her face pale but determined. She huddled against the wall, her hands trembling slightly, but she was trying her best to hold it together. Emily wished she could do more to reassure her, but right now the only thing that mattered was survival. Tomas moved quickly, clearing a space in the corner and setting up a perimeter. "We don't have much time. They'll send people on foot soon enough, and we don't want to be here when they do." Emily crouched beside him. "We'll fight if we have to, but we need a plan. We can't stay here long." "We're not staying long," Tomas replied. "I have another route out, but it's risky. The closer we get to the extraction point, the more dangerous it's going to be. We have to make it through the night." Emily nodded, her eyes scanning the cabin. The air was thick with tension, and every small sound felt amplified. The crackle of the old wood, the distant howl of an animal, the sound of her own heartbeat. But the silence wouldn't last. The door to the cabin shook with a heavy knock. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her first instinct was to draw her weapon, but she resisted. It could be one of their own, or it could be someone they didn't want to see. Tomas's eyes locked with hers. "Don't move, let me check." He crept silently toward the door, his footsteps light on the creaky floor. He glanced through the small crack in the door, and his expression instantly shifted. His hand dropped from his weapon, and he exhaled, relief flooding his face. "Don't shoot," he whispered. "It's Raúl." Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. Raúl? She hadn't expected him to make it this far. Tomas opened the door just enough to let Raúl slip inside. He was battered and bloodied, his clothes torn, but he was alive, a sight Emily wasn't sure she'd ever see again. "Raúl!" Emily exclaimed, rushing to his side. "What happened to you?" Raúl winced as he lowered himself to the floor, clearly exhausted. "The cartel. They sent an army after us. I had to fight my way through. I lost some of the men, but I knew I had to get to you." Tomas closed the door behind him and secured the lock. "You're lucky to be alive," he said, crouching. Next to Raúl. "We were beginning to wonder if you were going to make it." Raúl's face darkened. "They're relentless, but I've got some intel. The cartel's planning something big. They're going to hit us hard tonight. We don't have much time to waste." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean, hit us hard?" Raúl's eyes flicked nervously toward the boarded-up window. "I overheard their plans. They've got more men coming, and they're not just looking for you. They're looking to wipe us all out. This isn't just about stopping a few fugitives anymore. They want revenge." Tomas clenched his fists, his jaw tight. "That's just great," he muttered. "They're making a full assault." Emily could feel the tension in the room growing heavier with each passing second. They weren't just running anymore. They were on the verge of a full-scale battle, and no matter how well they fought, the odds were stacked against them. The cartel had the resources, the manpower, and the will to destroy them. "We need to move now," Raúl said, looking up from the floor. "We can't afford to wait for them to come to us. We have to make a move tonight. While they're still spread out looking for us, we can slip past their perimeter." Emily felt a surge of determination. "Where are we going?" "There's an old mine shaft a few miles from here. It's the last safe spot before we reach the extraction point," Raúl explained. "But we'll have to move quickly. The cartel's got the woods surrounded. If we're not gone by dawn, we'll be trapped." Emily exchanged a glance with Tomas. She didn't like the idea of moving under cover of darkness, but there was no choice. The longer they stayed, the more vulnerable they became. "Let's go," Jack said, having listened to the conversation from his position by the window. "We leave now while we still can." Tomas turned to Raúl. "Can you keep up?" Raúl grinned, despite the bruises and blood on his face. "Don't worry about me, just get me out of here." Emily didn't waste any more time. She grabbed her gear, motioning for Isabel to follow her. They had a long, dangerous trek ahead of them, but it was their only option. "Everyone ready?" she asked, her voice steady, though inside she was filled with fear. Jack gave her a firm nod, his face set in grim determination. "Let's move." The night was cold and the air was thick with tension as Emily led the group through the dense forest. The sounds of distant gunfire and the growl of engines echoed faintly behind them, reminders that they weren't alone in these woods. The cartel was out there, hunting them down. The clock was ticking, and every step they took felt like it might be their last. The team moved silently, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of fallen leaves. Emily kept her eyes trained ahead, though her senses were on high alert. The trees loomed over them like silent sentinels, their twisted branches scraping against one another in the breeze. Despite the isolation of the woods, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "We need to move faster," Tomas whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "If they're closing in, we don't have much time before they spot us." "I know," Emily replied, her voice strained but resolute. She motioned for Isabel to stay close as they trudged forward, each of them carrying what little gear they had. Isabel was quieter than usual, her face pale, but she was trying to keep up. Emily wished she could offer her more comfort, but there was no time. They had to focus on survival. Raúl, despite his wounds and exhaustion, was moving at the front, his sharp eyes scanning the path ahead. His experience in navigating dangerous terrain was invaluable now. He was used to operating in hostile environments, but even he knew this was different. The cartel was organized, well-equipped, and relentless. "I've been through this area before," Raúl muttered, "but they've probably got scouts posted up. We can't take the main trail. We'll have to head deeper into the woods, where it's rougher." Emily nodded, silently urging everyone to follow Raúl's lead. The farther they got from the cabin, the less chance the cartel would have of tracking them, but the terrain was getting tougher by the minute. Branches whipped at their faces, and the underbrush seemed to grow denser, making every step feel like a struggle. Suddenly, a crackling noise echoed from the direction they'd just come from. The hairs on the back of Emily's neck stood on end. She froze, signaling for the group to stop. They all crouched low, listening intently. A distant voice shouted, in Spanish too far to make out the words clearly, but there was no mistaking the urgency in the tone. "They've found the cabin," Tomas whispered. "They know we're gone." Emily's heart raced. The thought of the cartel tearing apart their only shelter made her stomach churn. But there was no time to dwell on it. We keep moving. We don't stop. Raoul moved ahead with purpose, his steps quick and calculated. They had no choice but to trust him. After all, he was their only guide through the night. Hours passed, or at least it felt like hours, as they navigated the dense forest. The trees grew thicker and the path steeper. The ground was uneven, with hidden rocks and sudden dips in the earth that threatened to trip them. Emily kept an eye on Isabel, who was growing slower with each passing minute. "Are you okay?" Emily asked in a hushed tone. Isabel nodded weakly, though her face was drawn with fatigue. "I'm fine," she whispered, though Emily could hear the tremor in her sister's voice. Emily didn't believe her, but there was nothing she could do. They were in this together and they had to keep going. The mine shaft was their only chance. If they could make it there, they might be able to regroup, get some rest and plan their next move. Raoul's voice cut through the stillness. "We're close, just a little farther." Emily felt a surge of hope. They were almost there, but just as quickly that hope was dashed when the unmistakable sound of an engine revving reached her ears. Her stomach dropped. "They're here," Jack said, his voice tight with dread. "We've got company." Emily's heart raced. They were too close to the mine shaft to turn back now, but there was no time to make a plan. She quickly assessed their situation. The sound of the engine was coming closer. Whoever was driving was trying to catch up to them. "We need to split up," Emily said quickly, her mind working in overdrive. "Raoul, lead the way. The rest of us will lay down some." "Cover fire," Tomas gave her a sharp look. "Cover fire? Are you crazy?" "They won't be able to see us if we spread out," she replied, her voice firm. "But we need to buy Raoul enough time to get to the mine. Once we're there, we'll be safe." Raoul didn't hesitate. "I'm with you. Let's move." The group quickly spread out into the woods, finding trees and boulders to hide behind. Jack and Tomas took positions at the front, while Emily and Isabel moved deeper into the woods. Emily's pulse quickened as she crouched low behind a thick tree trunk, her rifle ready. The sound of the approaching engine grew louder, and she knew that in just a few moments they would be under attack. "Ready?" Tomas asked, his voice barely a whisper. Emily nodded, her fingers tight around the trigger. They couldn't afford to miss. Not now. The engine roared to a stop, and then there was silence, the kind of silence that made the hairs on the back of Emily's neck stand on end. Then a crack of gunfire shattered the night. The cartel had arrived. Emily didn't hesitate. She popped out from behind the tree, firing a quick shot toward the headlights of the vehicle. The bullet hit its mark, and the vehicle screeched to a halt. But there were more of them. A group of cartel gunmen poured out from behind the trees, weapons raised, taking cover behind their vehicle. Emily's heart pounded as she ducked back behind cover. She couldn't let them get too close. If they did, they would be trapped. She squeezed the trigger again, her breath steady, aiming at one of the cartel members in the open. The man dropped, but the rest of them kept advancing. "Keep them back," Tomas shouted, his own gunfire ringing out. "Raoul, go!" Raoul didn't need another order. He bolted forward, disappearing into the shadows of the forest, heading toward the mine shaft. Emily didn't dare look back. Her focus was entirely on keeping the cartel at bay. The battle had begun. The forest erupted into chaos. Emily's heart was pounding as gunfire rang out around her, the sharp cracks of the bullets cutting through the night like thunderclaps. She ducked low behind the tree, her hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Her eyes darted to the left, where she could see Tomas and Jack returning fire from behind their cover. The sounds of gunfire were deafening, but she couldn't afford to be distracted. "Stay focused," Emily shouted over the noise, keeping her voice low but urgent. Isabel was crouched beside her, trembling, but Emily couldn't let herself worry about her sister now. She had to trust that Isabel would be okay and keep moving forward. She took a deep breath, steadying her rifle, and aimed at one of the cartel men who had exposed himself behind a fallen log. With practiced precision, she squeezed the trigger. The man dropped, but there were more of them. Too many of them. "Move!" Tomas yelled, gesturing for them to push forward. He was already on his feet, dashing from one piece of cover to the next. Jack was covering him, firing shots into the thick underbrush where the cartel gunmen were hidden. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, and the acrid scent of burning vegetation. Emily couldn't let herself freeze. She had one goal now, the mine. They had to make it to the mine. "Keep pushing," she shouted to Isabel, grabbing her sister's hand and pulling her along as they dashed through the trees. The sound of footsteps, both theirs and the cartel's, echoed through the forest. But Emily didn't look back. They couldn't stop. Not now. The mine shaft was just ahead. Emily could see the faint outline of its entrance, a dark cavern in the side of a hill, hidden behind dense trees. But the distance was still too great. If they didn't get there in the next few minutes, the cartel would have them cornered. Suddenly, a burst of gunfire raked the ground in front of them. Emily dove to the side, her heart racing. She heard Isabel's scream, but when she turned to look, she saw her sister had taken cover behind a large rock, her face pale with fear but unharmed. "Stay down," Emily barked, crawling toward her. The cartel wasn't far behind. They could feel the pressure of the chase closing in, and Emily knew they had no time left. Tomas and Jack continued to lay down, suppressing fire from the opposite side, but Emily could see the strain in their movements. They couldn't keep this up forever. She had to act. "Raoul!" she yelled, looking around frantically for the former soldier. "Where's Raoul?" Raoul had disappeared into the night earlier, but there was no sign of him now. Emily's pulse quickened as she scanned. The woods, her thoughts racing. They couldn't risk waiting any longer. She had to get them to safety. Without warning, a figure appeared through the trees. Raoul, his eyes wild with urgency, sprinted toward them, breathing heavily. His face was smeared with dirt and his clothes were torn, but he was alive. "Move!" he shouted, his voice sharp and commanding. "They're closing in. We need to move now." Emily didn't hesitate. She grabbed Isabel's hand, pulling her forward as Raoul led them through the woods, away from the gunfire. They were so close. The mine shaft was only a few hundred yards away, but the cartel was closing in fast. Emily could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. They had to make it. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from behind them, followed by a chorus of shouted orders in Spanish. The cartel had regrouped, and now they were charging forward, determined to finish what they started. "They're coming," Jack shouted, his voice tinged with panic as he sprinted toward them. "We need to get in that mine now!" Tomas was right behind him, his face grim with determination. "Go, go, go!" Raoul was already at the entrance of the mine, waving them forward. "In here, now!" One by one, they scrambled into the mine shaft, their feet slipping on the uneven ground as they moved deeper into the darkness. The sound of gunfire grew faint, and Emily allowed herself to exhale, though she knew this wasn't over. Not yet. They didn't stop until they were deep inside the cavern, the light from their flashlights barely illuminating the walls around them. The air inside the mine was damp and musty, but it was the first real shelter they'd had in hours. Emily paused to catch her breath, her chest heaving as the weight of the situation settled in. They had made it, but the fight was far from over. They were still being hunted, and the cartel wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. Raoul stepped forward, his eyes hard as he surveyed the group. "We've bought ourselves some time, but not much. We need to keep moving. The cartel will be on us soon enough." Tomas wiped the sweat from his brow, his face pale but resolute. "How much farther to the extraction point?" he asked, his voice strained. Raoul glanced at him, then at the others. "It's still a few miles, but it's the safest route we've got. The cartel doesn't know about the back entrance to the mine. We can make it if we don't waste time." Emily nodded, trying to push the fear down. "Then let's move." They couldn't afford to rest. Not yet. With a final glance at the entrance of the mine, where the sound of distant footsteps could be heard, they moved deeper into the darkness. There was no turning back now. Every step they took would bring them closer to freedom, or to their final confrontation with the cartel. The mine was silent, save for the sound of their breathing echoing off the damp walls. The narrow tunnels twisted and turned, disappearing into the blackness ahead. Emily led the way, her flashlight beam slicing through the darkness, revealing jagged rocks and abandoned mining equipment that had long since been left behind. Raoul was at the rear, his sharp eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, as if expecting the cartel to come charging down the tunnel at any moment. He'd been through countless situations like this before, but even he knew that this was different. The cartel was relentless, and they knew no mercy. "Stay close," Raoul murmured, his voice low and tense. "We can't afford to get separated." Emily nodded, her grip on her rifle tightening. She glanced back at Isabel, who was following closely behind her, still pale but managing to keep her footing. Tomas and Jack were next, their faces set in grim determination. The weight of what they had just escaped was heavy on all of them. But they couldn't afford to stop now. They were still far from safe. The tunnel they were in was narrow, the ceiling low enough that Emily had to duck slightly to avoid banging her head. The walls were wet with condensation, and the air was thick with the smell of earth and decay. She tried not to focus on the oppressive atmosphere, keeping her mind on the path ahead. "How much farther?" Tomas asked, his voice quiet but anxious. His breathing was labored, and he was clearly exhausted, though he didn't let it show. Raoul's face was grim as he glanced back at them. "A mile, maybe 2, but the closer we get to the exit, the more dangerous it will be. The cartel will be looking for us." Emily's pulse quickened at the thought. The mine seemed like the safest place they could be right now, but she knew that could change in an instant. The cartel had resources. They had men everywhere, and they wouldn't stop until they had them. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. "We keep moving, no stopping." They continued through the winding tunnels, the darkness pressing in around them. The sounds of their footsteps were muffled by the damp walls, and the silence felt suffocating. Every so often, Emily would glance back at Isabel, making sure she was still keeping up. Her sister was strong, but Emily could see the strain in her eyes. They'd been through so much, and yet they weren't out of danger yet. Minutes stretched into hours, or so it felt. The deeper they went, the more claustrophobic it became. The walls seemed to close in, and Emily felt the weight of their situation pressing down on her. She had to remind herself why they were doing this. They had to make it out. They had to survive. Finally, Raoul stopped, holding up a hand to signal them to halt. Emily tensed, instinctively glancing around for any sign of danger. The silence was deafening. Raoul crouched low, his face serious. "There's an exit up ahead, but it's not going to be easy. We'll have to climb up a steep slope to get out, and the cartel may have already set up a perimeter." Emily's heart skipped a beat. They were close, so close, but the thought of facing the cartel again, especially in such a vulnerable position, made her stomach churn. "We'll have to fight through," Jack said, his voice steady despite the obvious fatigue. "We've come this far, we can't stop now." Emily met his gaze and nodded. There was no turning back, they were committed. "Raoul, lead the way. We'll cover you." The tension was palpable as they moved forward, Raoul at the front, guiding them toward the exit. Every step felt like a gamble. They were exposed. If the cartel was out there waiting for them, they wouldn't have much time to react. Emily's flashlight flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls as they neared the exit. The opening was barely visible, a small gap at the top of a steep incline. It looked like it would be difficult to climb, but there was no other choice. Raoul reached the base of the slope and turned to face the group. "Get up there quickly, I'll cover you." Without waiting for a response, Raoul began to climb. His movements were fast, practiced, and he disappeared into the darkness above them. Emily gestured for Isabel to go next. "You're up," she whispered, her voice calm but urgent. Isabel hesitated for a moment, her fear obvious in her eyes, but she nodded and began to climb after Raoul. The others followed suit, one by one, each of them climbing the steep incline, their hands gripping the jagged rocks as they made their way up. Emily reached the top, pulling herself over the lip of the exit. She paused, her eyes scanning the dark landscape before her. There was no sign of the cartel yet, but that didn't mean they weren't out there. They had to move fast. Raoul was already on the lookout, his eyes darting back and forth as he signaled for them to keep moving. "We don't have much time." The moon was barely visible through the thick canopy of trees, but Emily could see enough to know that they were still in the woods, though it was far more open now. The mine entrance was hidden behind them, a dark hole in the ground, but the forest stretched out in all directions, offering little cover. Raoul motioned for them to follow him, and they began to move quickly, ducking low behind the sparse trees and rocks to avoid being seen. The forest was quieter now, but the silence only made Emily more nervous. She kept her rifle ready, scanning every movement, every rustle in the underbrush. It wasn't long before they heard the sound of engines in the distance, the unmistakable hum of cartel trucks closing in on them. The cartel was on the hunt. "We need to split up," Raoul said, his voice low but commanding. "You four head west, I'll take the other direction. We can't risk them seeing all of us at once." Emily nodded, her stomach tightening. She hated splitting up, but it was the only way they'd have a chance. "Be careful," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Raoul gave her a hard look. "I always am." With that, he turned and disappeared into the woods, leaving Emily and the others to follow his plan. They moved as quickly and quietly as they could, hearts pounding in their chests. The forest was their last chance for escape, but the cartel was getting closer. The forest was thick with tension as Emily led the group westward, the moonlight filtering through the trees in jagged beams. Every step felt like an eternity. The faint sound of the cartel trucks growing louder behind them was a constant reminder that they were being hunted. Tomas was up ahead, his eyes scanning the path for any signs of danger, while Isabel and Jack followed closely behind. Emily's mind was racing. Raoul had split off from them, and though she trusted him, the thought of going it alone in the woods with the cartel closing in made her stomach churn. They didn't have the luxury of time, and every second counted. How much farther? Isabel's voice was barely a whisper, and Emily could tell she was trying to stay calm. But the fear was evident in her eyes. "Not far," Emily replied, her own voice low but determined. "Keep moving." They couldn't afford to slow down, not even for a second. The cartel would be on them before they knew it. A rustle from behind. Them made Emily freeze. Her grip on her rifle tightened, and she motioned for the group to stop. They all crouched low, peering into the darkness behind them. Every rustling sound in the woods made Emily's heart race faster. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then she saw it. Movement. Shadows creeping between the trees. "Get down!" she hissed, signaling for the group to take cover. They dove behind the nearest cover, a thick cluster of shrubs and rocks. Emily's breath caught in her throat as the shadows came closer. She could hear voices now, low and urgent, speaking in Spanish. The cartel had found their trail. She motioned for Tomas and Jack to hold their positions while she slowly crept forward, trying to get a better look at the approaching cartel members. Her heart was pounding in her ears, but she pushed the fear aside, focusing on the task at hand. The cartel was moving in their direction. The trucks had stopped, and now it was just foot soldiers on the hunt. Emily could see them clearly now, their faces hidden in the shadows, but their weapons were unmistakable. They were closing in fast, and they were ready for a fight. Emily's pulse quickened. They couldn't outrun them. It was time to fight. She motioned for Jack to follow her as she slipped into the shadows, using the trees for cover as they positioned themselves for a possible ambush. The sound of the cartel soldiers' footsteps grew louder as they drew closer. Emily could see the outline of one soldier ahead, his rifle slung over his shoulder. She whispered to Jack, "When I give the signal, take out the one on the left, I'll handle the other." Jack nodded, his expression set in grim determination. The moment was now. Emily waited until the last possible second. As the cartel soldier took a step forward, she pounced. Her rifle came up smoothly and she fired with precision. The soldier dropped instantly, collapsing to the ground in a heap. The second soldier didn't even have time to react before Jack took him down, a quick shot to the chest, silencing him forever. For a moment, there was complete silence. Emily's heart was pounding in her chest, but she knew they couldn't relax. Not yet. She turned to Jack, giving him a nod of approval. "Nice work." "Stay alert," Jack replied, his voice steady. "There's more of them out there." Emily glanced back at Tomas and Isabel, giving them a silent signal to move up. The group quickly gathered near her, the danger far from over. They couldn't waste any time. "Raoul said we need to keep moving," Emily said in a low voice. "Let's get to the extraction point." They moved quickly, trying to stay low and avoid detection. Emily kept her rifle ready, her senses on high alert. She could still hear the sounds of the cartel moving through the woods, but they were a little further behind now. The ambush had bought them some time, but Emily knew it wouldn't be enough. They had to get to the extraction point, and they had to get there fast. It wasn't long before they reached a clearing. The moonlight illuminated the path ahead, revealing a narrow trail that led toward the edge of the forest. Emily's breath caught as she saw a figure emerge from the shadows. Raoul. His eyes were hard, his face set with a mix of relief and something darker, something she couldn't quite place. "They're coming," he said in a voice so quiet it barely registered. "They know we're here. We don't have much time." Emily's heart dropped. "How far to the extraction point?" "About a mile," Raoul replied. "But the cartel's already starting to surround the area. We'll have to make a break." "For it?" Emily nodded, her mind racing. This was it. They were close, but the final stretch was going to be the most dangerous. A loud crack echoed from behind them, the sound of footsteps pounding through the forest. "They're here," Raoul said. "Run!" Without another word, they broke into a sprint. The sound of the cartel's pursuit grew louder, and the adrenaline surged in Emily's veins. Every step she took felt like the last one. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, but she couldn't slow down. She glanced back for a split second, just in time to see a group of cartel soldiers burst into the clearing, rifles raised. But it was too late. They were already too far ahead. "We've got to push through," Emily shouted, her voice fierce. "Stay with me." They pushed harder, adrenaline driving them forward. The extraction point was near, but the cartel wasn't. Far behind. They could hear the trucks revving in the distance, and the sound of gunfire rang out, echoing through the trees. They were almost there. The trees ahead began to thin, and Emily could see the faint glow of headlights. "There it is," Jack shouted, pointing toward the clearing ahead. The extraction point. They were so close, but the cartel was right on their heels. The headlights of the extraction vehicle shone brightly ahead, cutting through the dense forest, their beam a beacon of hope. Emily's heart was hammering in her chest as she pushed, herself harder, her legs aching with each step. The sound of the cartel's pursuit grew louder, but she refused to let it slow her down. They were so close. The end was within reach. She could hear the roar of the cartel trucks behind them, the tires tearing through the forest floor, relentless and determined. There was no time to stop. The extraction point was just ahead, a small clearing where the vehicle was waiting to take them to safety. But the cartel wasn't about to let them go without a fight. As they neared the clearing, Emily's eyes darted to the trees around them, every shadow, every rustle in the underbrush. She could sense the cartel closing in, the air thick with tension. They had to make it, or everything they'd fought for would be for nothing. Raoul was in the lead, his military training evident as he moved with purpose, pushing through the underbrush. Behind him, Emily and the others followed closely, moving with grim determination. Tomas was barely holding on, his exhaustion clear, but he wasn't about to give up now. Isabel was steady, her face tense but determined. Jack, ever the calm one, stayed at the rear, watching their backs. "Keep moving," Raoul's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "We're almost there." Emily could see the extraction vehicle now, a sleek black SUV parked in the clearing. The driver was already in place, his eyes scanning the woods for any sign of trouble. But trouble was already here. The crack of gunfire echoed through the trees, followed by the sound of men shouting in Spanish. The cartel had closed the gap. "Go! Go!" Emily shouted as she pushed herself harder, her breath coming in ragged gasps. They were so close now, but the sound of the approaching cartel soldiers was deafening. They were within reach, just a few more yards. Raoul reached the SUV first, diving into the passenger seat and slamming the door shut. Emily, Isabel, Tomas, and Jack followed close behind. As Emily threw herself into the vehicle, the sound of gunfire erupted, the bullets striking the trees around them. The driver didn't hesitate. He slammed his foot on the gas, and the SUV roared to life, surging forward away from the clearing. The cartel soldiers had reached the edge of the clearing just as the SUV sped away, but it was too late. The vehicle was already out of their reach, and the cartel was left standing in the middle of the forest, helpless as they watched their prey escape. They moved quickly, trying to stay low and avoid detection. Emily kept her rifle ready, her senses on high alert. She could still hear the sounds of the cartel moving through the woods, but they were a little further behind now. The ambush had bought them some time, but Emily knew it wouldn't be enough. They had to get to the extraction point, and they had to get there fast. It wasn't long before they reached a clearing. The moonlight illuminated the path ahead, revealing a narrow trail that led toward the edge of the forest. Emily's breath caught as she saw a figure emerge from the shadows. Raoul. His eyes were hard, his face set with a mix of relief and something darker, something she couldn't quite place. "They're coming," he said, in a voice so quiet it barely registered. "They know we're here. We don't have much time." Emily's heart dropped. "How far to the extraction point?" "About a mile," Raoul replied, "but the cartel's already starting to surround the area. We'll have to make a break." "For it?" Emily nodded, her mind racing. This was it. They were close, but the final stretch was going to be the most dangerous. A loud crack echoed from behind them, the sound of footsteps pounding through the forest. "They're here," Raoul said. "Run." Without another word, they broke into a sprint. The sound of the cartel's pursuit grew louder, and the adrenaline surged in Emily's veins. Every step she took felt like the last one. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, but she couldn't slow down. She glanced back for a split second, just in time to see a group of cartel soldiers burst into the clearing, rifles raised. But it was too late. They were already too far ahead. "We've got to push through," Emily shouted, her voice fierce. "Stay with me." They pushed harder, adrenaline driving them forward. The extraction point was near, but the cartel wasn't. Far behind. They could hear the trucks revving in the distance, and the sound of gunfire rang out, echoing through the trees. They were almost there. The trees ahead began to thin, and Emily could see the faint glow of headlights. "There it is," Jack shouted, pointing toward the clearing ahead. The extraction point. They were so close, but the cartel was right on their heels. The headlights of the extraction vehicle shone brightly ahead, cutting through the dense forest, their beam a beacon of hope. Emily's heart was hammering in her chest as she pushed, herself harder, her legs aching with each step. The sound of the cartel's pursuit grew louder, but she refused to let it slow her down. They were so close. The end was within reach. She could hear the roar of the cartel trucks behind them, the tires tearing through the forest floor, relentless and determined. There was no time to stop. The extraction point was just ahead, a small clearing where the vehicle was waiting to take them to safety. But the cartel wasn't about to let them go without a fight. As they neared the clearing, Emily's eyes darted to the trees around them, every shadow, every rustle in the underbrush. She could sense the cartel closing in, the air thick with tension. They had to make it, or everything they'd fought for would be for nothing. Raoul was in the lead, his military training evident as he moved with purpose, pushing through the underbrush. Behind him, Emily and the others followed closely, moving, with grim determination. Tomas was barely holding on, his exhaustion clear, but he wasn't about to give up now. Isabel was steady, her face tense but determined. Jack, ever the calm one, stayed at the rear, watching their backs. "Keep moving," Raoul's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "We're almost there." Emily could see the extraction vehicle now, a sleek black SUV parked in the clearing. The driver was already in place, his eyes scanning the woods for any sign of trouble. But trouble was already here. The crack of gunfire echoed through the trees, followed by the sound of men shouting in Spanish. The cartel had closed the gap. "Go! Go!" Emily shouted as she pushed herself harder, her breath coming in ragged gasps. They were so close now, but the sound of the approaching cartel soldiers was deafening. They were within reach. Just a few more yards. Raoul reached the SUV first, diving into the passenger seat and slamming the door shut. Emily, Isabel, Tomas, and Jack followed close behind. As Emily threw herself into the vehicle, the sound of gunfire erupted, the bullets striking the trees around them. The driver didn't hesitate. He slammed his foot on the gas, and the SUV roared to life, surging forward away from the clearing. The cartel soldiers had reached the edge of the clearing just as the SUV sped away, but it was too late. The vehicle was already out of their reach, and the cartel was left standing in the middle of the forest, helpless as they watched their prey escape. Emily looked out the back window, her heart still racing, her body trembling from the exertion. The forest was disappearing behind them, the sounds of the chase fading into the distance. She had to keep her focus. They weren't safe yet. Raoul was already speaking with the driver, giving him directions as the vehicle barreled down the rough forest road. The terrain was uneven, but the driver handled it like a pro, expertly navigating the winding paths as they pushed farther away from the cartel's territory. Emily's mind raced as she sat back in her seat, trying to steady her breathing. They had made it. They were out. But she couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't truly safe. Not yet. The cartel was vast, and this was only the beginning. She knew that no matter how far they ran, they would never truly escape the consequences of what had happened. Isabel leaned her head against the window, her face pale and exhausted. Tomas sat beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, offering her a silent comfort. Jack was next to Emily, his eyes focused on the road ahead, but his face was set in that familiar expression of calm determination. Raoul, ever the leader, was already planning their next move. As the vehicle sped through the darkened roads, Emily's mind kept returning to one thing: the cartel. They had escaped this time, but how many times could they outrun the inevitable? "We're safe for now," Raoul said, breaking the silence. "But we're not done. We need to stay ahead of them. Keep moving." Emily nodded, but the weight of their situation pressed heavily on her chest. She knew what Raoul meant. This wasn't over. It would never be over until the cartel was defeated, and that would take everything they had. "We'll do what we need to," Emily said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "We'll fight until the end." For a moment there was silence in the vehicle, each of them processing the weight of their escape. They had survived the ambush. They had made it through the mine. They had run for their lives through the woods. And they had outrun the cartel's pursuit. But there was still so much more to be done. Tomas finally spoke, his voice hoarse but resolute. "We've been through hell, but I don't regret any of it. Not if it means stopping them. We fight together." "Together," Isabel repeated softly, her voice stronger than it had been all night. "No matter what." Jack gave a small, grim smile. "Let's make sure it's worth it." Emily's heart swelled with pride for the team she had fought alongside. In the end, it wasn't just about survival. It was about making a difference. It was about fighting for something greater than themselves. As the SUV sped into the unknown, leaving the cartel and the dark memories of the past behind, Emily knew one thing for sure. They were not done fighting, and they would keep moving forward no matter what.